Bones tardes a tots i a totes. És un plaer, com a regidor de Cultura de Barcelona, poder presentar aquest llibre, aquesta reedició del llibre de Colm Tóibín, Homenatge a Barcelona. És una carta d'amor, preciós, nostàlgic i estimulant viatge al passat, instantània, precisa i preciosa, que mira de copsar sense fer ús de la nostàlgia, l'ànima que s'amaga sota els plecs de la nostra ciutat. Però sobretot, resposta a la pregunta del milió, entendre per què Barcelona és com és. Tot això i alguna cosa més és homenatge a Barcelona de l'estimat i llegit, el que vol dir per a un autor dos vegades estimat, Colm Tóibín, un dels grans autors en llengua anglesa, 4 cops finalista del Premi Booker. Tóibín va escriure Homenatge a Barcelona fa 35 anys, el 1990, i va fer-ho originalment en anglès. L'any 2003 es va traduir per primer cop al català, però des de feia anys era impossible de trobar. Ara Llibres i l'Ajuntament de Barcelona han decidit reeditar-lo en català i per primer cop en castellà amb motiu de la participació de Barcelona i també del Colm com a ciutat convidada d'honor a la Fira Internacional del Llibre de Guadalajara. Una edició revisada, actualitzada, amb pròleg del mateix Tóibín, traduccions al castellà de Maria Colomer i al català de Víctor Aldea i il·lustracions de Pau Gasol Valls. Colm Tóibín va arribar a Barcelona l'any 75. Franco encara vivia. Les llambordes plantejaven la majoria dels carrers, hi havia serenos, i encara quedaven vaqueries on anàvem a comprar la llet fresca. El brugit de la vida al carrer, la calor, la sufocant humitat, l'encanteri i desdivisió d'una ciutat que despertava de la grisor de la dictadura, el va enamorar. Hi va viure 3 anys, fins al 78, i des de llavors un fil tan invisible com umbilical el té lligat per sempre a Barcelona. Sens dubte, 35 anys donen per molt. Barcelona en 35 anys ha mudat la seva pell i ho ha fet més d'un cop. L'essència de la nostra ciutat, aquesta és la meva opinió, és la mateixa de sempre, però el pas del temps l'obliga a estar en constant evolució. Aquesta metamorfosi afecta dels anys que van saltant del calendari, afecta continent i a contingut, afecta la ciutat i a la ciutadania, una societat que en 35 anys tampoc no s'ha mantingut immòbil. Ho diu el mateix Tóibín al pròleg del llibre. Malgrat tot, malgrat els conflictes, les tensions i els problemes que van apareixent, Barcelona continua sent una ciutat de meravelles. Una ciutat, remarca, que les últimes dècades ha fet el que sap fer millor. Ha après a absorbir la influència i l'afluència de l'exterior. La seva mirada a Homenatge a Barcelona s'atura en algun dels grans esdeveniments històrics que ha viscut la ciutat, però també en els records més íntims, més personals. Una mirada que, com els bons vins, envelleix a la perfecció. Potser perquè entre els ingredients que ha fet servir per cuinar aquest llibre no hi ha un excés de nostàlgia, que, tots sabem, tendeix més aviat a tornar-los agres. Per acabar, voldria acabar fent referència en el capítol en el que Tóibín dedica a la Guerra Civil a un poema que José Agustín Goytisolo va dedicar a la seva mare, Julia Gay, que va morir bombardejada pels feixistes al març del 38. Un poema que crec que avui tots hauríem de recordar. Deia Goytisolo, i recorda Tóibín, ¿dónde tú no estarías si una hermosa mañana de Barcelona, en Barcelona mía, llena de pájaros y flores y muchachas, pero rota de pronto por el estruendo de los bombardeos pilotados por hombres que reían y hablaban y cantaban en idioma alemán mientras ametrallaron, porque creían todos, que ser una raza superior a los demás, cuando en realidad eran solo la peor raza que nunca hubo en la tierra, peor aún que llenas del desierto que pudren lo que tocan, peor aún que zopilones que viven de la muerte. Aquí digo, ¿dónde tú no estarías si esta hermosa mañana los dioses no te hubieran abandonado? Moltes gràcies.
Bé, moltes gràcies, Xavier Marcet, regidor de Cultura de l'Ajuntament de Barcelona. Jo soc Joan Carles Llibres, orgullós editor de Colm Tóibín, i bé, com a editor el que he fet bàsicament és que havia pres moltes notes, tenia un discurset, però en realitat és que jo crec que, igual que vosaltres, tenim moltes ganes d'escoltar el Colm Tóibín, aleshores és que crec que vaig a dir pràcticament res, sobretot també per si m'apaguen la llum i que crec que era una senyal de no allargar-se. Estem molt contents, molt orgullosos, ja ho saps, Colm, t'estimem molt. Com deia el regidor, el llibre és una carta d'amor a la ciutat de Barcelona, a Catalunya, a la cultura catalana, i aquest amor que tu ens sents per Catalunya i per la ciutat és el que en dies com avui, l'any passat també al CCCB, en l'acte que vam organitzar, és a dir, sempre i en les llibreries és l'amor que intentem retornar-te. Ens agrades molt com a escriptor en tot allò que toques, tant assaig, no ficció, narrativa, i això, i t'estimem. Bàsicament, l'acte d'avui també és un acte de retorn d'aquest amor, d'aquesta estima, i només dir que el llibre ha estat possible gràcies a una feliç idea del Servei de Publicacions de l'Ajuntament de Barcelona, en el qual es van trobar un dia, es van proposar de recuperar aquest llibre que estava desaparegut de les llibreries incomprensiblement, perquè de vegades els editors badem i no, bé, no sé, la vida ens passa, i aquest llibre que teníem en ment en Ara Llibres, però no l'havíem programat. Amb l'empenta i l'ajut de l'Ajuntament de Barcelona, que és coeditor d'aquest llibre, no només hem recuperat i l'hem renovat i hem fet una edició que espero que us agradi molt del llibre en català, sinó que també l'hem traduït per primera vegada al castellà, perquè ha circulat molt per el món, el podem trobar en molts aeroports en anglès, és un llibre que circula molt, però en castellà encara no estava. Jo crec que amb motiu de la Fira de Guadalajara és una feliç, que comissària l'Anna Guitart, doncs és una feliç ocasió perquè us endinseu en este llibre en el que us farà somiar o recordar, o si no recordar, somiar una ciutat que pot ser ben bé ja no és la que veiem en el nostre dia a dia, tenia les seues coses, en fi, la gent de Barcelona anava per les Rambles el cap de setmana, feliçment, i coses que ara ja no passen, però crec que és un exercici de nostàlgia molt bonic per estimar-se més la ciutat. Abans, en broma, perquè fa molta broma, el Colm deia que és com era una expressió de Irish-plaining, hem quedat, és a dir, un irlandès que ens explica a la gent d'aquí què és Barcelona. Doncs benvingut a aquest Irish-plaining perquè ens ha portat la ciutat també arreu del món, també amb la seva literatura, i ara sí calle i es dona pas al Colm Tóibín i a l'Anna Guitart perquè tinguin una conversa que serà segur deliciosa. Gràcies.
Som-hi. Passo jo primer? Gràcies. Molt bona tarda. Ui, m'he espantat a mi mateixa. Molt bona tarda a tothom. Com esteu? Molt benvinguts. Quina il·lusió poder ser aquí avui compartint aquesta conversa amb el Colm. Colm, bona tarda. Com estàs?
Bona tarda.
Què tal? Quina impressió, no, això de presentar així el llibre a Barcelona o què?
It's amazing, I suppose, after all this time, to have the book again.
És un llibre, efectivament, que ja no es podia trobar, ja ho ha explicat el Joan Carles, i que ara, gràcies a aquesta feliç idea, conjuntament amb la Núria que tenim aquí davant, ja el podem llegir. Voldria dir-vos que quan acabem l'acte, ho dic ara perquè no me'n vull oblidar, hi haurà signatura de llibres. El Colm es quedarà una estona i si no el teniu encara, si teniu ganes de comprar-lo, quan sortiu, a primer cop d'ull no es veu perquè estan com amagats, però hi ha una llibreria, hi ha una paradeta i podeu comprar els llibres que vulgueu. Una pregunta que va per allà dalt, de fet. Em sento amb retorn. És normal? Em sentiu doble, també vosaltres? No, sóc jo sola, perfecte, doncs res. Com si tingués alguna mena de cosa amb la personalitat, em vaig sentint dues vegades, en fi. Al final de la conversa també tindrem una estona per preguntes, per comentaris. No sé si heu tingut temps ja de llegir-lo perquè acaba de sortir, però si voleu aprofitar, de fet al Colm li preguntaríem 47 coses, o sigui que si voleu anar pensant, al final tindrem també aquest temps que dedicarem a parlar una mica amb ell. Escolta, Colm, començo pel principi. El regidor de Cultura, el Xavier Mercè, destacava una part del teu pròleg que has fet expressament per aquesta nova edició, on tu parles de Barcelona com la ciutat de meravelles, no? És així realment com la veus, com la vas veure des del primer moment? Tu vas arribar aquí que tenies 20 anys.
I think if anyone, one of the problems, one of the reasons why there's so much tourism in Barcelona is the sheer beauty of the city and the beauty of the experience of being in the city, especially if you're from Northern Europe. In other words, you come to a city where people live on the streets, where in Ireland, I mean, when I was growing up in Ireland, you didn't look at somebody if you saw them coming on the street. It wasn't good manners. It was considered wrong. You put your eyes down or you looked away. The shocking arrival, people just would look at you. And you could sit there looking at anyone you wanted to. And honestly, you might think this is nothing because you're used to it.
Yeah.
And the second thing is, if you come from Northern Europe, the idea that food is for pleasure was reasonably new to me. I mean, you were brought up to believe you don't eat because you like the food, you eat to live. So you get turnips and Brussels sprouts and awful potatoes. And I mean, it was just the whole pleasure of that. But when I came here first, which was 1975, the pleasure became also the pleasure of politics. That's a strange idea, the pleasure of politics. Because the first demonstrations for amnesty, libertad, after the death of Franco, were really extraordinary manifestations of seriousness about how life will be lived in Catalonia. And watching moments where you watched, for example, the trade union movement join with the Catalan nationalist movement. This is the early days after the death of Franco. And just watching those marches of people who were factory workers and people who were nationalists and people who were communists and people who had been anarchists even. But that just watching that happen and watching for example, the first referendum, for example, on the Constitution, or the return of Tarradellas. I was actually in the square. I was in Plaza San Jaume when Tarradellas came back. I mean, I know you make jokes about it. For me, it was really moving. After all those years in exile, this man was returning and he was on the balcony. You see, this is important for me because in Ireland, this was not happening. Politics, there was no pleasure in politics. That the government of the Republic of Ireland was deeply conservative and the Catholic Church still controlled things. And in the north, there was a war going on that seemed impossible to end in the 1970s and in the 1980s. And into the 1990s. So watching the miracle of here, there were some very funny things. In the Palau de la Música, some Saturday in, I suppose, 1976, late 76 maybe, the program was only in Catalan. The previous week it had been in Spanish, but it wasn't bilingual even, it was just in Catalan. No announcement, nothing said, there it was. And watching that sort of slow movement. But it came for me with the arrival of summer, with the beauty of summer here, with the way people lived on the streets, with the food, and with the way also the two languages, watching how the two languages were moving with each other. All of that was sensuous. I mean, it was about pleasure. And unfortunately, the rest of the world learned about this and came here in huge numbers. But there was really good reason for that.
Però això en part és culpa teva, perquè vas escriure aquest llibre,
know.
ara ja ho ha dit el Joan Carles, es ven als aeroports.
I know it's called publishing, writing, spreading information, freedom of knowledge.
Yeah.
And that brings with it, has a dark side too.
But we know who to blame now. De fet, ara parlaves, no? Has dit tantes coses que van sortint al llibre, però potser començaré per aquesta, quan parles del català, no? Que tu expliques al començament que hi ha un moment que estàs amb un sopar, em sembla que és, i tu pensaves que havies après una mica la llengua i dius, no estic entenent absolutament res, què està passant, no? Clar, llavors descobreixes que no és castellà, sinó que hi ha el català.
Yeah, I mean, the first one was hearing in the market, in the boqueria, Kemes. It wasn't Kemas. And a friend who was Irish as well said, listen, she's saying Kemes. She's talking Catalan. That's Catalan. And then, of course, we were with friends, and they were ornithologists. And every time a new bird appeared, they said, "Cé seo? Cé seo?" I would start, so that, "Cé seo? Cé is?" And, but then I mean, the classes trying to work out that extraordinary past tense, vachana. Right? Hold on. You go to go. No, don't translate. Just say vachana, vachana. And then, of course, the words that when Garcia Lorca came to Catalonia, he loved the word nuval. He thought that was the most beautiful word. But then he had a friend called Jaume Miravitlles.
Wow.
And Lorca coming from Seville. So, Jaume what? Jaume Miravitlles. And all that came to with, I suppose, words like pastanaga. Mm-hmm. Like pastanaga sounds like an Irish word. Gerd. And the wonderful moments when somebody would come from, say, well, just let's take Madrid as an example, and would say, "Oh, you're Catalan." "No, I don't speak Catalan, but I understand everything." I say, okay. Un kilo de gerd. What's a kilo de gerd? And of course, gerd is one of those extraordinary words. Yeah. It actually has an Italian connection. But what I suppose what I'm saying really is that the extraordinary achievement that caused Catalonia to remain bilingual rather than for Catalan to become the minority language spoken in villages was really well organized. And I interviewed a woman called Anna Moll, and she was the first head of Politica Lingüística. Yeah. And then there was Miquel Trueta, and they were so determined to make at least the city bilingual. And that has been an extraordinary achievement. It hasn't happened elsewhere. It's not easy to do. And so that's another aspect of the pleasure, of the sensuousness, that you go into a shop and you're never sure whether it's quemes or quemas or pastanaga or zanahoria. I mean, those words, just take those words. This is the city where one person says zanahoria for the same thing, and another person says pastanaga. Like, where are we?
Perquè, Colm, una pregunta. Quan tu vas venir aquí, què sabies de Barcelona? Per què un irlandès com tu arriba amb 20 anys i es planta aquí?
Everybody knew homage to Catalonia. So the George Orwell version of the story is this extraordinary idea that in this city, it's the only place in history it's happened, an anarchist revolution took place and lasted for about 3 months or 4 months. And his description of it is really sensationally interesting and has proved to be more or less accurate. But it's called Homage to Catalonia, but he didn't really write about Catalan or Catalan culture. So the only other thing was that there had been an Irish poet called Piers Hutchinson who had come here as a translator, and he had translated Giuseppe Carne, and he had translated, I think, Salvat Papaset, and there was a sense of that. But of course, no one knew, is Picasso Catalan? Is he not Catalan? So there were so many questions that were still unanswered, and there was really so little known.
Picasso surt al llibre, de fet, pares atenció a uns quants artistes importants, no? Picasso un d'ells, Miró, que ara penso que estem celebrant l'aniversari de la Fundació, Casals, que també et va impressionar molt, no?
Yeah, I mean, the book I wrote was in a way of answering certain questions that I didn't know the answers to when I started. For example, if Picasso came to if he came to Barcelona, in what way did Barcelona affect him? I know he did the early paintings there, but in what way? So it was terribly interesting to start tracing figures like Nunez, figures who had been in Paris. Isidore Nunez lent Picasso a studio in Paris. So when Picasso went to Paris first in 1899, again 1900, 1901, he was only with Catalans at the beginning. Obviously that changed. Obviously he became a different sort of painter. But it is fascinating then to start looking at all of the buildings downtown that the Picassos lived in, or that Picasso himself had studios in. So dotted, you could make it into a sort of trail or a walk. And that obviously interested me. But the fact that Picasso's mother knew Miraut's mother. And that connection was there between families. Obviously, the city was smaller then. So all of those things interested me. Also, the question of Miraut. Like, when did Miraut go to Mallorca? To what extent did the city of Barcelona matter to Miraut? How did that happen? And then the large question of Gaudí. And the Sagrada Familia, and I went, suddenly discovering Catholic Catalonia, like going into the Sagrada Familia to meet the people who controlled it, who were so Catholic. It was the day in 1988, everyone's too young to remember 1988, but there was a general strike in 1988, and I'd never seen a general strike before. They don't happen normally. It was the most exciting idea that no one was allowed to go to work. And the Sagrada Familia people call it the good day to come to the Sagrada Familia because we're meant to be closed. But they had actually people guarding outside in case the Reds came to take the Sagrada Familia in 1988 as they did in 1936. It didn't have very many people, but just finding that idea that they explained to me in really serious faces that this Sagrada Familia is an expiatory temple. And I'm a good Catholic. I know what expiatory means, that the sins being committed all over the city. Obviously, all of us are sinners, that were be expiated in the Sagrada Familia. Well, that was so far from the Barcelona that I was living in. But it was there. It was fascinating.
Perquè, clar, quan et planteges escriure el llibre, quan estàs aquí, què volies explicar exactament en el sentit? I m'explico que hi ha molts moments en què parles dels catalans, del que veus, no? No us perdeu segur que quan ho llegiu, com parla de què és una sardana. A mi em va fer molta gràcia, per exemple, és molt bonic, i és el que deia ell abans, no? Que és com no sé com ho ha dit, un Irish planning, però és molt bonic veure-ho des dels ulls d'una altra persona, però tu no feies només això, perquè també expliques moltíssimes coses d'història. Per exemple, has començat parlant del moment històric en què vas arribar i tu decideixes començar a preguntar a molta gent. O sigui, aquest llibre l'has fet a partir d'interessar-te i deies, tothom que volia parlar amb mi, jo l'anava a veure.
Yeah, it was even using the libraries, even doing research in the Biblioteca Nacional, in the old Hospital de Santa Creu, just going into that building every day, asking for books, and the whole sense of its history. First of all, I suppose the important element is there isn't another city that was very powerful, say, really powerful in the 14th century, and was powerful again in the second half of the 19th century, and not in between. And so that you have the buildings, the extraordinary, for example, the Gothic churches in the city, but also La Volta Catalana, the secular buildings, Salatinell, for example, or the Ajuntament within the Ajuntament building, that you have this extraordinary strength in the architecture, that it's not an architecture filled with, for example, ornament. It doesn't have flying buttresses. It has just the way it's built. I suppose the first beauty was that rose window of the Iglesia del Pi, of Santa Maria del Pi, of just that rose window taking up so much space in that. If you just sit and look at that, there used to be a seat, so it's gone now. A lot of things are gone, but there used to be a seat where you could sit and just watch the extent of that rose window. But then I suppose the most beautiful for me would be Santa Maria del Mar. But so you start there with the idea that before the 14th century, there's very little. But then if you just isolate the 14th century buildings, they really are astonishingly beautiful and grand. And yeah, so I started that. But the second half, once the Eixample is built, you really are in a period of pure excitement. There's an extraordinary level of excitement, not only, I suppose, about the architectural life of the city, but the musical life of the city. Because it really is impossible to explain. You guys, Catalans, are meant to be really sensible, and you're meant to be really interested in, business and hard-headed and, fem nació, and fem business. But that actually, if you go into the Palau de la Música, you think, how did they let this happen? I mean, just the way the interior or exterior of the building is made. I mean, I'm not talking about scandals. I'm not talking about things that pass. I'm talking about the thing that's there now. And so my job in the book really was to see, how did this happen? Who was Domènec i Muntaner? I mean, we know who Gaudí was. Gaudí. I mean, Gaudí is a very well-known figure, but who is Puig i Cadafalch? Who is Domènec i Muntaner? And of course, sitting every day either in the Miró Foundation or in the Hospital de Santa Creu, and just getting all the books and reading about, for example, their interest in Romanesque, their involvement in the Romanesque architecture, and attempting to establish a national Catalan style in architecture, which would include steel, which would include curtain wall, which were the most modern techniques, using also medieval motifs all the time. So all of that was new. There isn't really another city, perhaps Antwerp, there are cities in Belgium maybe and Dutch cities that have that same mixture of using modern building techniques with a sense of medieval ornament and referring constantly to moments in history in the past. That is effectively a sort of nationalist architecture, which, of course, in exactly the same years in Ireland, we had the novel of Joyce, we had Ulysses being made as an Irish novel, we had the poems of W.B. Yeats, we had the Abbey Theatre, but this was being done in the verbal arts, but here it was being done in the plastic arts. And so I was sort of watching how nationalism makes its way into art, and just simply attempting to use things I knew from Ireland, in how that high emotion about identity can make its way into a set of buildings or into a set of poems.
Aquest excitement que dius, realment jo crec que és d'un dels ingredients més importants del llibre, perquè vas llegint i jo crec que es nota, no? Com ell es va meravellant amb les coses, com va descobrint, com va tenint preguntes i d'alguna manera ho vas compartint amb nosaltres. Jo et volia preguntar, perquè ara quan has parlat de Santa Maria del Mar, hi ha un moment que tu em parles al llibre i expliques que vas a un dinar, a un sopar, no recordo exactament, amb un dels carrerons que donen precisament i que abans ningú hi volia viure allà i que després, en canvi, es va convertir en un barri on sí que la gent tenia ganes d'anar-hi, i quan ho anava llegint em feia gràcia, perquè realment són 35 anys enrere, ja ho hem dit, com ha canviat tot, però moltes reflexions que ens estem fent ara, algunes ja havien començat allà, no? I tot això, per exemple, dels barris, d'on viurem, dels lloguers, etc., és sorprenentment actual, m'ha semblat.
Yeah, but I think the city, today is Corpus Christi, and for example, what do you call it, the Au Combalia, the sense that, has that always been there? You wonder, is that from medieval? But there's a sense of it being a medieval moment. But I remember, and there has to be people here who remember, that on Corpus Christi, in front of that very cathedral in the afternoon, the Spanish army would gather with horses, with generals, and with their guns, and they would make a massive sort of the thing Donald Trump wants at the moment, to have a big military parade in front of the cathedral. That, at the moment, is unimaginable. If you say, well, do we want to exchange all the tourists with their pulling their suitcases along in front of the cathedral, or the Spanish army, with their horses? Which do you want? But it also means that things change. That image, which you could find in photographs, I bet there are Roca Català photographs of that moment. If you want a military parade, you have to remember it will change. There will be a time when the military parade will not happen. Things change. The city shows things change. I was talking today, earlier on, I was asking if anyone remembers, but no one did in the room, that if you were facing the Ajuntament building in Plaza Sant Jaume, to the right-hand side of the door, in 1975, 76, 77, I think it was taken down in 77, but certainly it was a big plaque in stone that said, La guerra ha terminado. El ejército rojo has been defeated. And what's wonderful now is no one even remembers the plaque was there. Things change. And it's important for any dictator or anyone coming into the future saying, things change. You go, we forget you. And the other thing is just behind the Opera House in Carrer Sant Pau, a large group of Pakistani immigrants have arrived to rescue Barcelona from the misery and danger of those streets before the Pakistanis came. And anyone who goes down that street is a lesson in what immigration outsiders can do to a city, the energy they can bring, the 7-Eleven shop, the 24-hour shops, the wonderful barber shops, the sense of life, different life in the city, the fact there's a mosque at the end of that street, the fact that at the edge of the bars you can see groups of Pakistani men usually drinking tea or drinking Coca-Cola while everyone else drinks, that you have a sense of another life coming into the city and adding enormously to, if you can call them what you want. I would like to call them the new Catalans, but that any city, the fact that in America at the moment they need demons. In Hungary, in the countries that are really going anti-democratic, they need demons, and they've made immigrants into demons. But if that street, you could really show building by building how those buildings were crumbling, how they were dangerous. They were places where no one in their right mind would go at night. And so now it is a lesson to the world, that street. And I think it should be even more, it should be celebrated by the city much more, as this is what Barcelona could do. It could get energy from outside, which is actually part of, maybe it's something that Barcelona's been getting all along. But that street, I think, shows that, and it's something, it's something the United States, but various European countries also need to learn, that energy comes from outside.
De fet, al llibre dius que una de les coses que sabem fer millor, no sé si els barcelonins o els catalans, però crec que ho podem ampliar, és alimentar-nos precisament d'això que ve de fora, no? Que m'agrada que ho diguis, perquè estem en un moment en què el nostre posicionament, no ens ho estem mirant exactament des del mateix lloc que tu, precisament. Ara està sent una mica més complicat, saps? Sí. Hi ha alguns paral·lelismes també que m'han fet molta gràcia del llibre, són casualitats, però el llibre s'acaba l'any 92, que és un any molt important i que també determina els últims capítols i la transformació de la ciutat. És veritat que va ser un moment molt clau i hi ha un moment que m'ha fet gràcia perquè estan a punt de fer el nou aeroport i penso que ara, no sé si ho has seguit, però el debat d'aquests dies torna a ser un nou aeroport. Vull dir que una mica tornem a estar allà, però per situacions una mica diferents.
Yeah, it was interesting. It was absolutely fascinating when it came to 1988, for example, and it was clear, it was announced that Barcelona was going to have the Olympics. And of course, 1988 was also the 50th anniversary of the end of the Civil War, of the withdrawal of the international brigades. So I saw something very interesting where the international brigades who had come to fight in the Civil War had actually a commemoration in 1988, but it was very small. It was barely covered on television, for example. Okay. But the big thing was, 100 years earlier, it was called La Nostra Energia, and it was all centered on the Great Exhibition and on the transformation of the city, that dream city that came with the Great Exhibition, and the buildings that came, the Parque Ciutadella, and just a whole sense of people reimagining a city. And that the number of times politicians speaking, referred to that great exhibition as being the sort of energy giver for the Olympic time. And there was a wonderful moment where Felipe González, I only saw him speak once, which was in Barcelona. He was wearing a beautiful jacket. And every time he said anything, he said it 3 times. So he would say, solidaridad, solidaridad, solidaridad. I thought it was amazing. And he said that you people thought the sea was your enemy. And so this idea of a socialist coming into a city to say we don't just want to increase wages, we want to increase the quality of life in the city. want to open the city. So the first thing you do is open the city to the sea, make this recreation. Again, you see, this is all under question now because the way in which La Barceloneta and the sea and the beaches have become part of this nightmare of tourism. But actually it was a dream. And it was a socialist dream. It was a dream of how people could live better in a city if the city improved. And so that was another, I suppose, that whole idea of taking energy, looking for what in the past do you need? And the first thing is don't mention the Civil War. Don't bore us. Don't tell us about the Civil War. We know about it. We don't need to hear about it. But give us 100 years earlier. And you were talking earlier about the City of Marvels. Well, of course, there was that novel that came. Yeah. And so it was a nice time to be here when those dreams were being dreamed. And, it was before Airbnb, I have to say. Anyone ever thought that Airbnb what?
Hi ha un moment molt emocionant del llibre que et volia demanar si ens vols explicar, tot i que llegir-lo ja era emocionant, però vaig pensar, si tinc l'ocasió li demanaré, que és un concert de Josep Carreras.
Oh, you mean the one with Montserrat Caballé?
Quan comença a cantar...
I mean, everywhere you went, there was Montserrat Caballé. And she was doing with Freddie Mercury, and with her and Carreras together.
Sí, quan comença a cantar Carreras, cada cop comença a cantar una cançó molt emocionant, que tu has de preguntar quin és. Hi ha un moment, potser t'ho estic dient malament, però hi ha un moment en què estàs escoltant a Carreras i comença a cantar una cançó que tothom coneix. I tu preguntes, quina és aquesta cançó, no? I és La Migrant.
Oh, right. And it was a song where everybody was really moved by. I mean, that was also an important element in the thing where, what are they called? Are they called the Said the Judges? And I only really, going into the old Celeste, which was a pretty small venue, and seeing Maria del Mar Bonet, and realizing I had never heard of her before. She wasn't known outside here. And hearing those songs, and No trobaràs la mala fa temps que va fugir, un dia se'n va anar i va deixar aquí. They were so moving, and they meant so much. And then there was Louis Jacques. And I saw him on television recently giving evidence in Madrid in some court case. That's Louis Jacques from Estaca. And I suppose that idea of the songs, first of all, the ballads, L'Emigrant or the Habaneras, or, the fact that, I suppose the first time I heard a Catalan song was Victoria de los Ángeles, singing Damunt de tu només les flors, which is an art song. But, the other thing I want to just briefly talk about, but the big shock was Wagner. I mean, you guys and Wagner, there was one time when, in order to get a ticket for the Liceo, you had 5-minute window to book for the whole year. And if any Wagner was coming, it was completely booked out. And then you went to see the Wagner. And the Catalan audience, because obviously there were no outsiders because they couldn't get tickets. Not that they wanted tickets, really, for Wagner at the Liceo, the tourists, but there were just these massive number of Catalans staring at the stage in wonder as Wagner, as the Parsifal came out. There was a level of silence, a level of concentration, a level of engagement that really made you wonder if you'd ever understood this place at all, because this is in recent years. I mean, this is not in the 80s. This is recent years where Wagner still has an extraordinary power over the imagination of a certain sort of Catalan bourgeois person. It's really amazing. It's really, really extraordinary.
Al llibre em fas pensar que parles sovint, o en diversos moments, del Liceu, que també et serveix per explicar una mica la societat barcelonina.
Yeah.
Ho he trobat molt bonic.
I mean, the first time I went there, I bought a cheap ticket, but I thought if you bought a ticket for an opera, you could see the opera. But at the very top of the old Liceu, there were seats where you simply could see nothing, but you could just hear. So I thought this was unfair. I thought this was class hatred. And I decided that for the very top note, it was Cavalier, and she was singing Puccini. And you know how lovely those top notes are. She's Mimi, or she's... And it was... so I decided to just lean forward, put one hand on the shoulder of one guy in front and one hand on the shoulder, and lean right out. So I saw her. But, watching the opening nights of the old Liceo, when all the fashionable people would come down in their cars and their chauffeurs, and they would sort of run across the street in case anyone from the drugstore right beside it, the drugstore Liceo, was going to come at them and take their money from them. But that was a big moment. And then I came back here to work for the BBC when the new Liceo opened. Oh. And the slogan, "El Liceo és per tots." And it was Trovatore, Verdi's Trovatore was the first opera. But the publicity people followed me around to stop me saying, this is an exclusive club for an exclusive group of people. But even if I said it was once upon a time, they'd say, no, stop that. This is for everybody. This is a new Liceo. And so that was, it is a sort of, I suppose, a palimpsest, the Liceo, of the sort of changes that occurred.
Sí, és molt interessant com vas descrivint el segle XX, no? Per exemple, amb totes les lluites, amb tot el que va significar, també per barris. La veritat és que és una part, n'hi ha moltes, però és una part històrica molt interessant. Però hi ha una paraula que has dit que no vull deixar escapar, que és celeste. Celeste. Perquè us he de dir que quedem fatal els catalans. O sigui, els barcelonins som uns rancis. Ho dius tu, no ho dic jo. No? Quan parles de sortir a la nit, no som precisament una gent que tu descriguis com molt entusiasta.
Yeah, if you were looking for, what's it called? Juerga. You didn't come in 75, say in the 70s, you didn't come. If you came to Barcelona looking for guitar playing and people shouting "Olé," and if you went into Celeste, you found there were at least 100 or 150 very young people who were all talking really seriously to each other in a most serious way. And it was very common if you said to anyone, where do you go later? Like, what happens? No, això no fem. No anem a casa. És que jo tinc molta feina. I mean, obviously that happens up in the Pallars, where everyone has molta feina. Like, no, és que estem tractat, és que cardat per... No és que no anem ara perquè és molt tard. No, això no ho fem. No, demà tampoc, That if you applied this to Celeste, there was, I don't know if it's true, but it was a rumor that the police one night just came in and could not understand who these people were, why they weren't singing or dancing or getting drunk, who they were. And so they took them all into Via Laetana and questioned them. And if you look at the names of those, say, 80 people, all of them became regidors, or became the mayor of Barcelona, or became, Lluís Llach or Maria del Mar Bonet, or became Maragall. This was a ruling class. Celeste was a ruling class, having having just one glass of something very, like half a beer or something, before they took over power, which effectively they did, and I'm glad they did. But it was it was a very hard country to be sure about ever, because, and then of course I need to mention in the book La Batum de Berga, which is today, isn't it? And you go there and you think, what? Like, because I went and had supper with a friend of mine in Berga before, and it was that where, if you're Irish, you watch the bottle of wine, the single bottle of wine, and it's not even going to be emptied. One glass per person at the table. And you think, geez, are they never going to give us a little bit more? And but it's never as though someone's going to go over and open another bottle. And that was the dinner beforehand, the soupar. And then you go out into this wild business of everyone wants to be on fire. And everyone, wants to drink Pacharan or something ridiculous. And so that was another aspect of the strangeness of things.
Jo abans he dit que parles de la sardana. Vols explicar-nos com és una sardana?
Well, it was very hard to work it out. I mean, you make a circle, And then you put all your belongings in the middle. Obviously, it's very important that all the belongings are... It is as though a group has organized itself to guard your possessions. So it's a metaphor for a sort of paranoid capitalism, where you say, okay, first thing you do is everything belonging to us. Nothing behind us, but everything belonging to us. And then this tiny sound comes from this very reedy, I don't know the translator, how you can do reedy instrument. And it doesn't sound like much. And then they begin to move. And there's obviously one fellow in charge, but you're not sure how much control he has as they begin to do something. Now, I've never worked out what it is. And people say, no, there is a very emphatic set of steps. And then it rises. And then, oddly enough, it becomes very beautiful in the way it seems to the energy is held, withheld, released, and the music actually, which is it's all wind instruments, isn't it? It's all with some
percussion.
Yeah, percussion, and I actually I began by being just puzzled and thinking, what a dull dance compared to, for example, what happens in Seville, or the idea like no one is going to emerge as a señorita in the middle of this. And with what's it called? But
Castañuelas.
Sorry, I don't. But it does have a particular sort of beauty when it soars, and I don't know how to describe that. I'm sure I didn't do it well in my book.
No.
But I mean, but putting the stuff in the middle is odd.
Colm, he d'anar acabant perquè donarem la paraula a tota aquesta gent que t'ha vingut a veure, però et volia preguntar perquè quan vas escriure el llibre deies que escrivies des de dues nostàlgies, que era aquest primer moment de quan vas arribar aquí, aquesta efervescència de la mort de Franco i tot el que va suposar. Hi havia també la nostàlgia pels teus anys viscuts, per la pròpia experiència, i jo em preguntava com havia estat per tu tornar a aquesta Barcelona ara, perquè és un llibre que has recuperat, que has rellegit, que se n'ha fet una edició especial per ara, i volia preguntar-te com ha estat tornar a aquelles coses i alhora com és per tu. T'he vist molt conforme amb el canvi. T'he de dir que els barcelonins em sembla que no estem tan conformes com tu, però ens agrada que vingui algú a fer-nos veure les meravelles també de la ciutat, però també com és per tu ara, com és aquesta relació personal també amb la ciutat.
I come here every year for about a week. Besides other times, I come with my partner, who's not from here, and it's really hard to walk the streets and not say, this is where this happened, this is where. That actually any city, a city like Barcelona especially, all of us could just say that you imagined you were away from the city for a few years and you came back and you would go, this is Bar Núria. This is where so-and-so happened. This is where, after the football matches, the crowd used to come to shout for Barça, just at Núria. You could go down almost every part of the street and say, I had a friend who, I couldn't believe it, he went and took communion and then walked out in the street, that church at the corner of Carme. That every time you walk anywhere, there is a memory. Yeah. And a shop that has gone, a shop that's still there. The extraordinary thing that no one in Barcelona ever notices, which is the swifts.
Swifts?
The birds that come in April. And they begin to stitch in the air. And one Saturday you look up in the sky and you notice them. And but there's if you go down, let me think, if you go down Carme and you keep going, but you don't go as far as, say, the Tres Tombs. You're just halfway there. Sometime, you see, the problem is that you can't stop explaining. Mansplaining, Irishplaining, just writersplaining. You just explain, and you've got to stop doing this because your partner's getting completely fed up listening to you. Saying, could you stop? Like, could you live in now? Like, there's a moment, extraordinary moment, really, in was it early 77 or maybe early 77, where I'm in a taxi, and it's a Saturday evening. It's probably about 7 o'clock, and the taxi driver starts to go on his klaxon, ba 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 ba, and they had legalized the Communist Party, and La Pasionaria and what's his name, Carrillo, they're in Paris about to fly into Madrid. And the world, it looks as though that moment is about to change. Obviously, it doesn't change, but for that moment, that Saturday evening, and you see, I'm walking on the street with my friend, and I want to say to him, this is where I was in the taxi the night they legalized the Communist Party. He said, what Communist Party? So you're permanently locked in to, it's like something in Dante's Inferno, where you cannot stop remembering. You cannot stop seeing little buildings or little bars. And for me, the only thing that writers need, really, is the constant use of memory. Images from memory, images from the past, trying to see if you can make a pattern for them. So it's good for me, but it's very boring for everybody else.
No sé si algú de vosaltres li vol fer una pregunta al Colm. Aquí davant n'hi ha una. No sé. Mira, tenim micròfon.
Hello. It's two questions, very short. One is, what triggers in you the need to write? You've mentioned the memory, but maybe there's more. And the other is, what are you working on right now? If possible.
It's really mysterious, the process of, it isn't merely the impulse to write, it's the impulse to finish a book or finish a poem. That, you so many times you start something and you think, well, I know the rest. And then it's the whole idea of communicating it. It's very close, it is a mysterious process. It belongs to us from the beginning of civilization. I mean, as soon as the hunters went out to hunt, one hunter stayed behind in the cave to make a picture of the hunting. And they wanted that image. It's really strange. But the impulse to finish requires a lot of work and a lot of determination and maybe a lot of insecurity. You feel, if I don't tell this story, I'll be a lesser person. I don't know what that means. I'm trying to finish a book of stories, and also I've discovered that out there in the world are a lot of composers, and they love libretti. They want to write operas. And so I've written 2 librettos in the last year, meaning for opera. It's just great. You just write down the words, and a composer puts a song to it, and then you go and listen to it. And I wish I'd known that before. I would have done more of them. But so I'm going to work more in opera. I mean, just writing the libretto, obviously not the song. So that's what I'm doing.
Well, hi, good evening. First of all, I just wanted to say thank you. The talk was inspirational, and I wanted to ask 3 questions, if you allow me. The first one is, how do you pronounce your last name? The second one, properly. The second one is, what does Barcelona mean to you? So how would you summarize it from the point of view of someone who's not from Barcelona but clearly holds it dearly to his heart? And the third one is, when are you going to put us out of our misery, knowing what Eilis Lacey is about to do with her life?
I'm going to take the third question first. I wrote a novel called Brooklyn, and then 15 years later, I wrote a novel called Long Island. And I thought Long Island, I really did believe that I had ended it with closure. I thought, it just shows you how little I know. I honestly thought, well, that's the end of that then. I don't have to think about that again. The problem is that it took 15 years to think of the ideas for Long Island. I'm 70. I was 70 at the end of May. So I'll be 85. So if you come to some sort of, what do they call it, old people's home and knock on the door and say, if he's still there, maybe. But I don't know what to do. If you have any ideas, let me know. I don't know what to do. Tóibín, as in has been, as in old bean. Tóibín. Yeah. And the middle question was, I find it very hard to think in abstractions. So the concept of Barcelona, I would have to, no matter what, find you a thing, a place, a precise date, So I just don't have that. I wish I would, because I'd be a philosopher then. I'd be much easier. But I'm hard, I don't know. But I don't know. Like that, I don't know. Yeah. Okay.
Hello, Tom. Nice to meet you. I would like to ask you about, I know from your book that you understand how important Catalan language is for our culture, but do you speak any Gaeilge yourself, any Irish language?
No, I'm from the east coast of Ireland. I mean, in our town, Gaelic would not have been spoken probably after the 16th century, that the Irish was spoken on the western seaboard. And so the answer is no. And even though we learned it in school, this is why the Catalan thing here was so impressive, that it worked. And I know that people who designed the sort of policies about linguistic policy here had looked at Ireland as a worst-case scenario. How do you ruin it? How do you get rid of a language? And I mean, how do you do that? So even when the state was founded in 1922, surely it would have been possible. And whatever was done, every single thing was wrong. We didn't get a television station in it for so long. We have one now, but I mean, why they didn't give us one in the 60s? It took a long time for a radio station to come, so it looked like a language that couldn't deal with technology. It looked like a language of poverty. It looked like a language you couldn't go to the market with. It looked like a language you couldn't go to America with. And so that instead of families becoming bilingual, families just simply made a decision, parents, we will not speak Irish in front of our children, so that they will not have the stigma of the language. And of course, now that looks absurd. And the effort now is to see if you could get that back. But it's very hard. And it's one of the reasons why what has happened here, even in the city of Barcelona, has been so impressive and important and inspiring.
Aquesta serà l'última pregunta.
Okay. Well, I'll try and take it back to the tone of how passionately you spoke about the city. I've lived here 5 years. I'm from England, and about 2 or 3 weeks into arriving, I was aware that I was experiencing feelings that I had only experienced once or twice before, a giddiness and a woozy headiness. And I was aware that the feeling was akin to romantic love. And there were kind of key moments where I was like, oh my God, like I'm in love with Barcelona, like almost in a romantic way, like I want to kiss it. And I'm kind of wondering if there are any moments that you remember where you had these extraordinary experiences where you felt like almost like you were falling in love with a person.
I did, yeah. I mean, I'm gay, and so when I came here in 1975, there was no gay bar. There was a rumor of one, but it wasn't there. And people said that Café de l'Opera was gay, but it wasn't. And that meant there were certain streets that were wild. And there were certain, if you walked down the Ramblas and went in to say, walked along Escudellers, people thought it was dangerous. It was a bit like Creu Sant Pau, people thinking it was dangerous. It wasn't. It was just filled with gay men walking up and down. And it was very exciting. If you're an Irish Catholic boy, age 20, it was tremendously exciting. And people talk about Plaza Real. People have a version of it now. Well, I can tell you in 1976, it was the most exciting place to be if your sexuality was mine. I don't know what it was like for other people. And yeah, that's a funny idea that you associate the sort of smells, the heat, the sense of the sensuousness, the pleasure in the actual buildings, in the way people walked, as having a sort of sexual thing that I can tell you didn't exist in Ireland. And if it had existed, it would have been stopped immediately by someone or other. And so, yeah, I understand exactly what you're talking about. And maybe that's what I'm really talking about, is a sense of finding, something that in the way the corner of a building, in the way food was made, in the way people walked, in the beauty of people, in the politics, that actually was sexy and it was great. Thank you.
Em sap greu que no tinguem més temps, perquè segur que, com jo, us quedaríeu molta estona escoltant-lo, però ara encara el podeu tenir una estona si voleu que us signi el llibre, i us recordo que hi ha una llibreria amagada, però hi és. O sigui que busqueu-la perquè podreu comprar els seus llibres. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
It was
Thank you very
a big
much.
pleasure.
Thank you.
Gràcies.
Thank you.